4-in-1 units are the holy grail of laser aiming modules: white light, vis laser, IR laser, and of course an IR illuminator. Unfortunately, when you find this holy grail, most of the time you just die of cringe. Now, I have been recommended the Roy Vivon GL4 Pro to try out as a 4-in-1 unit, but every video I have seen on it is disappointing. Poor white light and IR illuminator performance and a $400+ price tag makes it incredibly unappealing. But what if I told you you could actually get something better for 1/3 the cost? Well, keep dreaming, baby, because today we have the Toughsoul 9069, very nice, and it's here to make 50% of your dreams come true and dash the hopes of the other half forever. Full disclosure, no relationship with whoever makes these. Starting off with some basics, we have a aluminum body holding our white light, IR illuminator, and lasers. Keep in mind that the lasers are not co-aligned and you have two separate sets of turrets for each. We'll talk about that more later. The body is about 5 inches long, 2 inches wide, and 1 inch tall, and weighs in under 8 ounces, which for a 4-in-1 unit is pretty good. I am actually a fan of the form factor, even if it looks ugly, but then again, who am I to judge? Look in a mirror, buddy. On the right side, we have our IR illuminator and IR laser, and separated on the left side, we have our white light and vis laser. Moving back, we have our magnetic charging port for the non-removable battery. A lot of these Amazon units use this system. I don't like it. I wish it would use a CR123 or similar battery. It kind of makes the whole system a throwaway unit. Once that battery is done, the unit is essentially a paperweight. Moving back again, we have our mode selector and fire button. The two sides of the mode selector correlate to the vis and IR sides of the unit. On the left side, we have our light and laser, or just a laser. Now on the vis side, the fire button is hold for momentary, tap for constant, and double tap for strobe. Now, before we get to the IR side, we should talk about the fire button a little bit. It is just a simple rubber push pad. It actually feels really good. Very tactile, perfectly centered on your top rail. No options for a tail switch. Again, it's just the simple fire button, which I do like that in terms of simplicity, but that can have some ergonomic downsides, which we'll talk about later. Now back to the IR side of things, we of course have the IR illuminator only, IR illuminator and IR laser, and of course just the IR laser. But on the IR side, for the fire button, we only have hold for momentary and tap for constant. No strobe function on the IR side. Thank you. No longer will you accidentally give your NVGs an aneurysm by accidentally double tapping the fire button in the dark. As far as the selector and fire button goes, it's almost perfect. Almost. So the issue is the selector function has a half-second remembrance of the last mode that you had. So for instance, if you swap from IR to vis, it will flash the IR for a half second and then switch to vis. That's not that big of a deal, but if you have the white light selected, then you switch the mode selector to IR, you will get a half-second flash of the white light, which will get you kilt into sheets or whatever that saying is. Now, if you're aware of this issue, you can work around it by always discharging the short remembrance period after swapping, but it is very annoying. Alternatively, you could use a dedicated white light and only use the IR functionality on the 9069, nice, and never worry about it, but then that kind of wastes the whole 4-in-1 potential of the unit, which is probably why you bought it in the first place. The last thing to talk about on the body is the mount. On the bottom, we have 3 small crossbolts and a large locking block on the other side. It is missing recoil bosses, but other than that, it has a really good contact patch with even torque, so overall pretty good. Of note is that one of the supplied screws is shorter than the rest, so it always comes off when swapping the unit from rail to rail, so that is just a little silly. But now let's get to the important part, the performance. It's actually really good. You've probably been seeing it for a while now, but I really enjoyed using the unit and will actually continue to use it. The LED-based IR illuminator performs like a very high candela rifle light. It provides usable illumination out to about 150 yards depending on your ambient lighting conditions. There is of course some spill. It's not focused like a V-cell based illuminator would be, but again, you're only spending about 120 bucks, so what do you expect? If you are shooting very close to cover, or in a car, or in thick brush, that spill can be problematic as it's going to reflect a lot of that light back into your NVGs, cause them to auto-gate, dim your target, dim the rest of the image. That can be very problematic, but most of the time, the main beam is still focused enough to get the job done. Again, about 95% of the time, you just need to be aware of that downside. Now, getting to the laser, It is overpowered by like 30%, which makes it a little bit more difficult to be precise with. It tends to blow out in your goggles just a little bit. And that's a mistake that these companies make, thinking that everything needs to be as powerful as possible, when the IR laser being overpowered actually makes it more difficult to use. Now, before we move on to the white light, let's compare the IR illuminator performance to the Holosun 321, which is like $700 and has been the standard IR unit for a while now, especially if you're on a budget. $700 doesn't sound very budget, and the performance is pretty poor. Now, the Holosun illuminator works like you want it to. It can be focused down pretty tight and doesn't spill out like a LED-based illuminator. So in a couple scenarios, it will be a little easier to use, as it's not going to spill a bunch of extra light back on you, but the flip side is it only has the power to reach out to like 70 yards at max. Side by side with the Toughsoul 9069, nice, it gets curb stomped and dumped in the Boston River. The only upside of the 321 is that in a couple of scenarios, the tight underpowered beam is a little better than the flood LED illuminator, but in almost all situations, I prefer the more powerful version of the illuminator for actually illuminating and engaging targets. Now, the laser on the 321 is a little bit more appropriately powered and looks a little cleaner, so that is nice. But again, the 321 is heavier and 5 times the cost, so I really don't recommend those as a starting point. Now, talking about the white light, it performs very well. I would equate it to the new Streamlight HLX Pro, which is about 1,000 lumens and 50,000 candela, easily punches out to 100 yards and beyond depending on ambient lighting. Now, funnily enough, comparing the Toughsoul to the Streamlight, they cost, weigh, and perform about the same, but the Toughsoul has 2 extra lasers and of course the IR illuminator. Well, it's sounding pretty good so far, so what's the issue? Well, the turrets suck, and the pictures on Amazon lie. They look like a detent style turret, but in reality they're just some set screws with some Loctite. It is a jank solution, it should be better, but so far, after a couple hundred rounds, they have held 0. But again, keep in mind, I'm going to continue to evaluate this unit and some others that I have on hand. Something that you will notice in the testing footage is that I had it zeroed incorrectly because I slaved it to the optic for that night, and the optic's night vision settings don't really work, and it was way too big and blurry. I thought it was zeroed, but it was actually 4 inches off to the right at 80 yards. So that's not the unit's fault, that's mine. Now, why would you slave it to the optic? Well, it's because the Viz and IR lasers aren't co-aligned, and they have 2 separate sets of turrets, so you're going to need to zero it in the dark with either a slaved zero or constant offset, or zero the Viz laser in the day and then match it with the IR laser at night and calculate your offsets. All of that's annoying, but not necessarily a deal breaker. Something that I should mention about the IR laser is that it is almost overbore, which is a nice feature. It's about a ½ inch to the right, so even a converging zero at 100 yards is only going to be a ½ inch to the left at 200 yards, which is past the point where the IR illuminator works anyways, so not a big deal. The 4 main issues, as I see it, are the turrets. Not good, please update, I will pay more money for better turrets. Number 2 is the magnetic charging and non-replaceable batteries. Once the batteries dies, it's garbage. Number 3 is the mode memory issue. When switching from IR to Viz, and of course vice versa, you will get that momentary flash of the other option that you no longer want. And number 4 is only a problem for some builds, but that is going to be the fire button placement. This unit should be pushed as far forward on your rail as possible to reduce the light spilling onto the rifle, suppressor, and ultimately coming back at you, which is an issue for the somewhat floody illuminator. Now on my 11.5, perfect, works great. Pushing it all the way out to the end means I still get a good grip on the rifle, can easily access the fire button. On a 14.5 inch or even a 16 inch, getting it all the way out to the end not only makes it a little bit more unbalanced, but is also harder to reach, and you need to have a little bit longer arms, which, spoiler alert, I don't. But I really think this is at home on a 11.5 inch or shorter. I think it would be fantastic for a really compact system, whether that's 9mm, 300 blackout, as it does the white light really well as well, and it does the IR illuminator and laser okay for the money, and so far has held up just fine. So, no. To reiterate, I don't recommend the overpriced garbage that is the Roy V. Von GL4 Pro by Defense Distributed or anyone else. But I also don't recommend this underpriced garbage that is the Toughsoul 9069. Nice. I did have a really good time using it, I'm going to continue to use it, but it has a laundry list of downsides that you need to be aware of if this is something you even want to test. Because while more expensive units might be a waste of more money, this is a less expensive unit that might be a waste of less money, but still ultimately ends up being a waste. Now again, I only paid $120 for it, so even with my complaints, it works well enough to have a good time. So, with all that out of the way, guys, let me know what you think of the Toughsoul 9069, very nice. And of course, we have a bunch more of these Amazon special IR 4-in-1, 3-in-1 units coming up. Some of them are pretty good, even better than this, and some of them are even worse. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. God bless.